Hi, Professor Lars Svendsen. Welcome. Thank you so much for making the time for us.
Oh,
Really
thanks
happy
for
to have
having me
you on.
on.
Yeah, today we are going to talk about this little gem here. But it's only a part of, your work. I also have you another volume on hope. And yeah, if I could interview you on all your books, I would. But today we will focus on the subject of loneliness.
Yeah.
Um, which is something I think a lot of us can relate to and more and more. But I just want to start by telling you how much I've appreciated your work. You clearly do enjoy writing and researching because you seem to just sort of surveyed up and down, left and right. Um, I think I'm the most impressed by how you managed to conduct such a thorough survey on a subject and gather so much information from philosophy and social science and all sorts of fields. It's really rigorous. And you manage to have your own take towards the end of it. So it's not just like a collection of literature, but you do have a perspective that you share towards the end. And yeah, and have your own philosophical stance. So I suspect we will have a really rich conversation today.
Yeah, I hope so. Great.
Great. So I do have questions, but do feel
Yeah.
free to take it anywhere you want, and perhaps this will just go organically as these things always do. Well, first of all, I'm curious as to what drew you to write about loneliness specifically. I know you write about such a wide range of subjects. I have your another book on hope. I know you've written about boredom and fear, and I hear that you have been working or some an English volume is about to come out in stupidity. So back to loneliness. I mean, what drew you to writing it, and does how does it fit into does it work as part of your survey on human experiences? Are they connected in some way? Pick it away.
Yeah. Actually, what got me into loneliness was a book I wrote on freedom, in which one of my claims was that we've gotten personal, individual freedom pretty wrong.
Mm, mm, mm. Oh,
Because this notion of negative liberty is, of course, crucial in a political context,
yeah.
freedom from various sorts of restraints and so on. But then we've taken that ideal and made it into an ideal for personal freedom.
Mm.
And then our lives would be such that we would only be free if we do not actually commit to anything, because all sorts of commitments
Right.
would be restraints, that would be place limits on our freedom. And my take was rather that, well, freedom in the personal sense must rather be seen as the freedom to commit to something. But
Mm.
now, if this negative version of freedom is dominating in our culture, I thought, well, that must lead to a lot of loneliness. So let's investigate that. That was my starting point. And what was so much fun with doing this project on loneliness was that I got pretty much everything wrong from the start. I mean, I had all these same very common ideas about loneliness, that it's really on the rise, that there is such a thing as an epidemic. And I thought that this epidemic is related to individualization. And I thought that, well, Norwegians must probably be the loneliest people on earth. I thought that men were more lonely than women, that the increase in single person households would lead to increased numbers in loneliness and so on. I mean, I had all these usual ideas about loneliness. And then it all turned out to be wrong, which of course is a real gift when you're looking into something. Wow, I really got this wrong. And I also did something that's pretty unusual for a philosopher. I mean, I got raw data from 4 decades of surveys of the Norwegian population, and I
Mm.
crunched numbers. I did statistics. I mean, philosophers usually don't do that. Uh, but that showed me a completely different picture. So I sort of had to construct a new take on loneliness from my totally misguided starting point. And of course, that was a blast.
I hear the excitement in your voice. Yeah, yeah. So there was a certain turn, realized that you have to start from different um, perspective. I mean, you do very effective. First of all, let's establish this. You are Norwegian in,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it is a bit
And
of
of
a,
course,
mm, go
yeah,
on.
and Norwegians, we see ourselves as these loners. For instance, during the pandemic, a very usual joke in Norway was that we all had a sigh of relief when we could leave the 1 meter limit between people and return to our usual 2 meters. Uh, so, yeah, yeah. So I just assumed that we would be really be on the top of the list there, and it turns out that Norway is probably the country with the least loneliness on Earth, with the
Oh,
lowest
I
prevalence,
know.
and that was a huge surprise.
Well, I
So then
didn't
I had to
know. I read your book and then know. Yes.
yeah. So then I had to try to figure out how on earth can that be? I have to find some sort of explanation for this. And I also think that I found the explanation, namely that we are the most trusting people on earth. We have the highest levels of generalized trust on Earth.
Yes.
So if you walk into a room and you ask, say, 100 Norwegians, do you think that other people, for the most part, can be trusted? Most of them would say, of course. Um, and what we find on both on an individual level and on a social level is that individuals who have this generalized trust, who think that other people are
Mm,
trustworthy, tend to have pretty low levels of loneliness. And those with low levels of trust tend to have pretty high levels of loneliness. And the same goes when we look at different countries,
mm,
because whether you're lonely or not depends to a great extent what country you're located in.
yeah.
And we also see that countries with high levels of trust have low levels of loneliness, and vice versa. So,
It's
so then when you compare Norway to, say, a country like Italy, because in Norway we're really jealous of South Europeans because we see these cozy, warm communities and think that, wow, that must be great. Actually, but when you look into the numbers, the prevalence of loneliness is much higher in those societies, and the levels of trust are much lower. And not only that, Norway is a very individualized country. And that's to a great extent because of the welfare state, the Scandinavian welfare state model. Because the welfare state is a machine that produces individualization because it reduces your dependence on family. Um, and it's also pretty consistent that countries with high levels of individualization are countries with lower levels of loneliness. And I mean, our gut reaction would be the opposite. We would say that, oh, individualization is the root cause of the spread of loneliness. But actually, it's not like that at
it's
all.
actually really in the agenda of talking. It's in the lower parts of my agenda, but we don't care about agenda. So let's jump right into that. It's on trust and cultural factors, and I put in there trauma. But yeah, I think it is a very counterintuitive finding in your book.
Yeah,
It's that collect. So number one, well, let's go back to the drawing board, which is research. I don't think this is common sense, although it feels intuitive. Research shows that lonely people have lower generalized trust. What does that
yeah,
even mean, generalized trust? Let's say they're generally less trusting. I mean, I was already thinking, what's the chicken and what's the egg? You did say in the book that it's a correlation or causation,
yeah.
but I mean, I mean, I know you don't have the objective truth, but I do wonder if you have your hypothesis in which causes which one is chicken, which one is the egg.
Yeah. I think I mean, it is little bit speculative, but I mean, when we look at the numbers and you see what comes first, you can see, for instance, that a decline in generalized trust, and with generalized trust, we simply mean do you think that other people, for the most part, are to be trusted? I mean, that's what generalized trust is. And we see that a decline in generalized trust is usually followed by an increase in loneliness. So, for instance, my hypothesis with regard to the USA is that this extreme drop we've seen in generalized trust will lead to pretty extreme rise in levels of loneliness in the US
Mm,
in the years to come.
mm,
That would be my hypothesis. I haven't found any studies so far that document this, but I think that this is what we will find in studies of loneliness in the US in the years to come.
yeah. Well,
And
I know
and,
it's
and if you
speculative, but it's good
and
as yeah.
yeah, and also I mean, because what has happened to a great extent with trust in the US is linked to what I would say the tribalization
Mm,
of the US. It has become far less of an individualistic country and far more of a tribal country, with the two main tribes being Democrats and Republicans. And I mean, can I trust you? Okay, first I have to know if you're a Republican or a Democrat. And of course that prevents the sort of immediacy that's crucial for our connection
mm,
to others.
mm.
And if that immediacy is reduced, then greater levels of loneliness will, with all likelihood, follow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does the idea that, thank you for sharing that. I do think it's a counterintuitive finding that people in more collectivist cultures report feeling more lonely, but it very much echoes my personal experience of having lived in different cultures and countries. I think a big part of that was because I really enjoy engaging with strangers. And not
Yeah.
everyone has supportive, tight-knit families. And if you
Yeah.
heavily rely on your family, but you feel like an alien in your own family, then you're pretty much doomed. Well, I'm
Yeah.
exaggerating it a bit, but
Yeah.
it felt counterintuitive, but it actually makes sense that people are actually less lonely in individualistic cultures. It just feels weird even saying it, but it also does
Yeah.
make sense to
Yeah,
me.
and one of the reasons is also because in more individualized countries, you have to learn to trust strangers
Yeah. Yeah.
because you have to deal with them constantly.
Yeah.
Uh, Whereas in a more collectivistic culture, you can stay within your own group,
Mm.
and then you will typically have this mistrust.
And I work most
If you can stay with your own group, that is.
exactly, exactly. Like
Yeah,
I work a lot with people who can't find readily made communities. They usually feel like the misfits in many ways and in society, maybe due to their sexuality or all sorts of other reasons. Um, so yeah, I really hear that, and I just love talking to strangers. It's
yeah,
the aura of the town feels different when you
yeah.
walk into a coffee shop, when you walk into an elevator. I think the atmosphere feels immediately different. Hmm, that is an interesting start. And then I am also thinking about this whole trust, loneliness, trauma matrix. Well, with people with adverse childhood experiences, they naturally find it harder to trust people. And then so
Yeah.
I guess they would maybe, well, we've just discussed that it's a correlation or causation, but it could then lead to loneliness, which then leads to less trust and
Sure.
that as well.
And here I think we should address one thing pretty early because we can go into various psychological dispositions and so on later because that's also a large part of the picture. But one reaction I got when my book first came out is that some people criticized me for blaming the lonely for their loneliness.
Mm,
And of course, we have to point out that what we're talking about here are causes. We're not distributing guilt here. We're
yeah.
talking about causes
Mm,
of
mm,
boredom. And for instance, we know very well that if you do not get a fairly solid attachment pretty early in life to typically your parents could be some other people who care for you. If you do not get a really pretty firm attachment pretty early in life, then you will probably find it very hard to establish such attachments later in life.
Mm.
But of course, it would be absurd to blame the child for this. But I mean, that will be one of the causal factors
Mm.
that shapes the experience of this child as it grows up, and that could lead to problems of loneliness.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's really important to highlight that we're talking about causes, we're not talking about guilt.
I hear you, and we will have that as the frame in the background. And we will definitely come on to that. I was going to save that juicy part for later because you know how earlier I said you do have your own stance, and one of the quite a bold stance I feel is you talk quite a bit about personal responsibility and agency towards the end, which I think is brilliant. But yes, the ownership part can quite
Mm,
easily get interpreted as victim blaming. We'll come to
yeah,
that. We'll come to that later.
yeah.
Going back to more generalized things, I mean, I really admire how you blend philosophy with social science. I don't know how your brain does that. Um, but have you found yourself, what is the most, apart from the whole individualized culture versus collectivist culture part, what's the most surprising piece of data or information you found?
I mean, there lots of different stuff, but I think, for instance, the weirdest thing I found was that people who meet their friends every single day are more lonely than people who do not meet their friends as frequently.
Huh,
That's also pretty
it's
counterintuitive.
pretty counterintuitive.
Yeah, and then I found that it was pretty solid numbers for that in the data I analyzed, and I thought, why on earth would that be? And of course, if you meet your friends every single day, your social needs are probably pretty high.
Mm.
And if your social needs are pretty high, you're more likely to not get them satisfied.
Ah, so correlation, not causation again.
Yeah.
Because I do apologize. I
So
don't think
yeah,
I have
because yeah,
noted that. Mm,
yeah,
go on.
yeah. Of course, causation is it's so hard to establish. So we have to work with what we've got. Yeah. But of
Yeah,
course,
so does that
I always teach my students. I also have a lot of medical students. Always try to teach them correlation is not causation, and try to keep those apart. But at least very strong correlation
Mhm.
with a proper theory at least gives us reason to look for causation.
Mm.
Yeah,
So that does that include people who live together, or are you talking about people who seek out their friends' contact daily? Or the
yeah.
research doesn't draw the link.
Um, what was the question in the survey there was specifically with regard to friends.
Right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that would make sense. Because
yeah,
I would want to talk to you about people who might naturally enjoy or even need more solitude. Actually, now that we're on this, I heard that you mentioned elsewhere that there's a preference for solitude scale.
yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
know that. I should put
Yeah,
myself through that test. I mean, where can people
yeah.
find it? What does it actually measure?
Well, it's a survey, and of course, everything in this field, uh, when we look at prevalences and levels and so on, it's built on self-report,
Yeah.
and there are loads of of tests for sort of the bad variety for loneliness, but I've only found one for solitude, and I'm and of course I did a lot of these tests on myself, trying to figure out how I was calibrated when I did this project, and I was so average with return to loneliness. I'm the most regular guy you could find, uh, but in the preference for solitude scale, I was more or less off the charts. So I clearly enjoy my own company a
Yeah.
lot, which I guess is a good thing if you make your living as a philosopher.
Mm, mm. Yes. Well, let's clarify terms here because we haven't done that for our audience. Loneliness, solitude, aloneness, feeling lonely.
Yeah,
We don't have to define all of that, but we might just have to slightly
yeah,
clarify. Usually, loneliness is seen as negative.
yeah,
Solitude is usually praised amongst philosophers as positive. Is that where you would draw the?
yeah.
Mm,
I'd say that with loneliness, we're talking about a feeling of discomfort or even pain
mm,
related to a perception of yourself as not sufficiently attached or connected to others. It can be varieties within that, of course, but that's the general idea. Whereas with solitude, we're rather talking about a positive state in which you enjoy being in your own company,
mm,
we could say.
mm,
And both of those have to be distinguished from aloneness, which simply says something about the number of people you have around you.
mm,
And the general picture, for instance, with regard to aloneness and loneliness, is that they are fairly unrelated. When we look at the group level, people who report feeling lonely are surrounded by other people to pretty much the same extent as people who do not feel lonely. It's not
Interesting.
the number of people in your surrounding that determines whether you're lonely or not, but how you perceive your relation to those people in
Yeah,
your surroundings.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Really well said. And because those surveys were self-reported, we will never find this out from a survey. But do you have a speculation of this whole preference for solitude? How much do you think it's innate, or do you think it's like a muscle that you can train over time? Because I suspect for many people who feel lonely a lot, it would be amazing if they can transform their loneliness into solitude.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can actually train yourself to some extent. I mean, we have different dispositions. Some people are very social, some people are not very social. I don't use the extrovert introvert distinction, but I mean, but of course we differ in that regard. But everybody can sort of do some work on on themselves, on their own emotions, and I think that what's crucial for solitude is to get the conversation started with yourself. You are actually in your own company. I mean, that's defining the situation. You try to be in your own company. You are not living in the absence of the company of others. Um, and I think we're getting increasingly less skilled at doing that. And I think that a huge part of the reason for that are these things.
Yeah,
Um, because earlier, when say you missed a train or a plane or whatever, I mean, you were in a way thrown back upon yourself. I mean, you had to spend that empty pocket of time relating to yourself. And of course, then you train the muscles for relating to yourself. These days, as soon as those empty gaps of time occur, we pick this thing out, we open the social media, and we invite everybody else in.
yeah.
So we're getting increasingly less skilled at that. And yeah, there were probably, I'm also in the process of writing a new, pretty long afterword for a new edition of my old book on boredom
Yes.
that I wrote when I was half the age I'm now. I was 28
That
when
wasn't that
when I
long
wrote
ago.
it. Yeah, and I'm 55 now. So and a lot of has changed in those in those years in between. And I think that the prevalence of these things, I mean, and social media and so on, it's really one of the major changes in
Mm,
that period, which
mm,
has a lot of impact on our capacity for enduring both boredom and loneliness.
yeah.
And of course, I write about this experiment in the book, which I think is it's hilarious. I mean, this experiment in which test subjects were told to spend 15 minutes by themselves in a room doing absolutely nothing. And they made different versions of that experiment. In some versions, the test subjects were told not to use their phones, but they were allowed to keep them. And of course, they cheated. In another version of the experiment, their phones were taken away from them, so they had to endure the full 15 minutes, and they could report that, yeah, that really took its toll on them.
Mm.
And in my favorite version of the experiment, the test subjects were given an electric shock before the experiment started and told that they could administer electric shocks to themselves in order to break the monotony. And a surprising large number of test subjects did exactly
Oh my
that.
God.
Yeah. And of course, we could wonder, what on earth is this study actually a study of? Is it a study of a capacity for for loneliness or for boredom or whatever? And I think that's actually hard to determine from the design of the study itself. But what it does tell us is something about a lack of ability to simply draw on your own resources,
Mm,
to be in your own company and actually being fairly satisfied in that state for pretty limited amount of time.
mm, mm. I hear you.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm old enough to have grown up without cell phone. So, oh God, it feels like a distant past now. But I
yeah,
just do remember going to school every day. I either talk to the person next to me and you're forced to build relationship with relative
yeah,
strangers, or I have a relationship with the divine, talking to like whatever the sky or myself. So yeah, even that is more relational than
yeah,
empty scrolling with reels.
yeah,
Yes. And what you said about our intolerance of boredom and solitude, aloneness, it makes me think of how in prison you put people in solitary confinement as the ultimate punishment. Is that
yeah,
boredom or is that being alone? We don't know. And it's also why I think people pay really good money just to get rid of boredom. People pay really good money on the plane just to get on Wi-Fi.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But philosophers have indeed long praised solitude, not loneliness. And I'm going to read out some beautiful or poignant quotes from your book.
yeah.
C.M. Surin writes, at this moment, he's a grim writer, which I like. At this
Mm.
moment, I'm alone. What more can I want? A more intense happiness does not exist. So that's a bold statement. But I wonder what your thoughts are on the value of solitude. How do you distinguish between the kind of, I mean, people might be wondering, I guess people would have a very strong intuitive sense of whether or not they're enjoying it. And also I guess they can overlap. Um, I mean, let me pose it as a question. Can someone feel lonely and enjoy solitude at the same time or not? Um, Do you think these philosophers are masking their joy of solitude by romanticizing it, like masking a deficiency or something?
Yeah, I think certain some of them do, and then of course Rousseau is a clear example of that in his Reveries of the Solitary Walker, in which he goes on and on about how much he enjoys being in this excellent state of solitude, being in
Just
his own
sounds
company.
defensive.
And it's so obvious from reading the book that the guy's miserable. He's utterly miserable. So yes, so perhaps, but then again, there is perhaps some connection here because, of course, in solitude, you open up a space for contemplation. in which you relate to yourself, you relate your own thoughts, you relate your own conceptions, and so on. And uh, what is philosophy? It's ultimately about doing work on yourself.
Yeah.
You work on uh, ways of seeing, your own grasp of this and that, and so on. In that sense, I mean, philosophers tend to be really wrapped up in themselves. Yeah, I think there is some connection here, but we also find a lot of philosophers who warn against this, who see man as sees humans as essentially social beings, and that you should not withdraw too much into yourself. That really our interaction with others is what makes us fully human. So you find philosophers on both sides
Yeah.
of the fence there,
Yeah.
and and as for me, hmm, I guess I used to be a lot more social than I am, but maybe that's something. Maybe that had something to do with age. But I don't think I would be very well equipped to become a hermit.
Mm. Mm.
I would miss out on the company of others. But what I do like is, of course, to retreat every now and then and just mind my own thoughts.
Mm.
Then I've typically enjoyed having at least someone in my company, namely my dog. But she died a week and a half ago, so
Oh
we'll
no,
see
I
how
am
that turns
so
out.
sorry.
We'll see how that turns out the next time I retreat to my cabin to write something. But yeah,
Because
I mean, yeah,
is that her? You had her before in your cabin, right?
yeah, yeah,
And now you have.
yeah. She was a whippet, and I've had animals my entire life, so in that
Mm.
sense, I've always had the company, and I also wrote a book about that because I thought that that was after my book on loneliness. I thought that I'd written so many books on depressing topics that I wanted to write about something nice for once. So then I wrote the book called Understanding Animals,
Oh,
which is all about to what extent we can understand the mental lives of these creatures we have in our lives. So
interesting. I
yeah,
have not came across that one. Have a look. But thank you for sharing that. And I guess you would really feel her absence the next time you
yeah,
retreat to your cabin, isn't it?
definitely.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. But maybe you would also feel her presence at the same time. Don't want to presume, but
Yeah. Yeah.
mm.
Well, her presence is still here. I still think I hear her. I think I see her, and so on.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I'm really soft-hearted when it comes to animals. Yeah.
I can tell. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. Going back, yes, indeed. So there are the ones who absolutely praise solitude and almost to the point of romanticizing it and claiming that it's absolutely essential for personal growth and spiritual development. But then there are also others who warn against it. And I'm reiterating it because there's another powerful quote that I want to read out from your book again. It's quite a strong statement that they've made. Stendhal, I think you quoted, loneliness detaches you from others in a meaningful way. And in that respect, it also detaches you from yourself. So it's almost making the opposite argument where you can only find yourself in amongst humanity or with others. Basically, quoting you, basically you cannot become a human in isolation. And you reinforce this by quoting Stendhal. Um, Everything can be acquired in solitude except character. So that I mean that is an opposite argument.
Yeah. And
Mm,
I think Stendhal is right. And of course, this goes back to uh, say also virtue ethics.
yes.
Aristotle. I mean,
Mm,
why is friendship so crucial for Aristotle? From an Aristotelian point of view, you cannot become a virtuous person without friendship, because there are certain sides of you that can only be developed through attachment to others. So
mm,
if you do not have that attachment, those sides of you will never be developed, and some so so to fully become who you are, you have to you have to relate to others. Otherwise, essential parts of you would be missing.
I hear you. We can have both. We can have both
Yeah,
friendships, community,
yeah,
and solitude.
yeah,
I want to talk about friendship and love.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's another huge topic. I was saving it for later, but who cares? Um, let's do friendship before intimacy. I mean, different philosophers have offered wildly different takes on. I think friendship is actually less talked about in our modern discourse than intimacy and relationship. Because we can go down all those, eros, agape, which we're not going to do. But like friendship is more interesting. I don't think a lot of people talk about it. Um, the Stoics very rarely talk about it. The Cynics are very cynical. They don't think love is possible apart from utility. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. Montaigne, I know, talks about it a lot, and as far as I know, it's almost erotic the way he talks about it. I would think by
yeah,
modern definition, he's completely in love with whoever he calls friends. But
yeah.
maybe you can give
I
us
would
a bit.
agree. There's more than a hint of romantic love when Montaigne writes about his friend. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, perhaps we can give our audience a brief tour of how different people, philosophers or just people, have talked, like
Yeah,
from Plato to Aristotle. What's their definition of friendship? Some seem to be based just on values and utility,
yeah,
and maybe your own view. Is it essential to a good life?
yeah. I think that the two really big philosophers of friendship. Uh, um, one is, of course, Aristotle, and then people might be surprised that the other one is Immanuel Kant.
Ah,
Uh, because, of course, in the Aristotelian conception of friendship, friendship consists in that you wish someone else well. That's absolutely crucial for any sort of friendship. But friendship, they can take on different forms. You can have the friendship that consists in utility. I mean, we're friends because you scratch my back and I scratch yours, essentially. And Aristotle would say, well, that's not a very stable form of friendship because people change. You may not be of much use to me anymore, or I to you, and then the entire foundation for that friendship would be gone. So the friendship would dissolve. Another type of friendship is enjoying being in each other's company. We have fun. We have a shared interest, say in music, a group, or literature, whatever. But again, people change. For
mm,
instance, um, my main interest is probably still music,
mm.
and it has been. So I'm one of those guys with yeah new shipments of vinyl coming in every
Ooh.
week. Yeah, so I'm one of those guys. But I mean, so many of the people that I shared that interest with earlier, sometimes during their 30s, they sort of lost that interest. And of course, that would also dissolve the foundation of that friendship. So the prime variety of a friendship for Aristotle is of course the virtuous friendship, in which friends admire each other's virtue. Uh, and then try to picture how do these Aristotelian friends interact. I mean, I sort of see two guys say, "You're really virtuous." No, you're the
I
virtuous one.
know. It's just so
Yeah,
unthinkable in modern life. Like two guys in a
yeah,
pub talking about their virtues. Like, "Oh, so
yeah,
what virtuous things have you done this week then?
yeah.
What
And of course,
courageous things have you done?"
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I think that that's of course, it's a very, very demanding form of friendship, the virtuous friendship in Aristotle. It's basically a full-time job.
Mm,
Um, Immanuel Kant's conception of friendship is slightly different. I mean, he shares. pretty much Aristotle's views on the useful and the enjoyable variety of friendship, and and it sees both varieties as inferior. And what's crucial for Kant's superior form of friendship is that it contains a measure of intimacy, emotional intimacy. Friendship for Kant fulfills the role of letting you share your thoughts with someone and your feelings in an intimate way, thoughts and feelings that you would not be comfortable with sharing with everybody.
Mm.
So you have an intimate bond with them, and that's not a part of the Aristotelian account. So and I think that Kant here aligns much more with what we tend to think of when we think of close friends. And friends play a crucial role in Kant's philosophy because without friends, you would be totally isolated. You would be, in a way, stuck with your own thoughts, your own emotions, because you would not feel comfortable broadcasting them to everybody. And so friendship fills this role, and I think that Kant has some really interesting ideas here on our levels of attachment to others, because he points out that all humans have this antagonism in them, uh, in which we are both drawn towards the community, but we're also torn in the opposite direction
Yeah.
of being in just our own company.
Mm.
And of course, we different people will be different. We'll have different positions along this continuum, but we're all somewhere within that continuum.
Yeah.
And of course, the role of the friend here is in a way to be an intermediary. I mean, someone you can be with between those extremes.
That is so interesting. I think you're making some really important point here. So, risking a bit of repetition, I'm still gonna have to repeat what you said. So I think it's called unsocial sociability in Kant's
Yeah,
term. Basically, it's the tension that we all have an inherent need to want to be with others. That's why people clichés always say we're social animals. But indeed, we all also do need have a need for distance and to be left alone. And I think that tension is palpably felt for certain people, me including. Um, uh, it's just very relatable. And you're saying that friendship is almost a bit like a solution.
yeah. From the content perspective, it is.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna get a bit practical here for my audience. A lot of people I work with, as I said earlier, feels like misfits. Many of them are neurodivergent. Many of them are actually having a higher than average intelligence or just objective measurement, or have other kind of excitabilities that makes them feel like it's probably harder to find people on their wavelength.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on this? Just feel free to poke anywhere or even challenge it. What would you suggest to them? Do they just give up and train solitude, or find one or two people, or expand the definition of friendship, move to an individualistic culture so they can talk to strangers?
Well,
Um,
I think all of the above sounds like a good idea. But what I think is pretty essential here is that when you have this problem, you must also be open to seeing your own part in the problem. And when we talk about loneliness, we tend to talk about people being completely passive. They are subject to loneliness. We're talking about it to use an old Aristotelian distinction, in terms of pathos, not praxis.
mm,
You suffer loneliness. And I think that we should also see lonely people as agents. And but these agents tend to be also led somewhat astray by their own experience of loneliness.
Mm.
Because when I feel lonely, the whole phenomenology of loneliness is that my surroundings are denying me something I really need. My surroundings come up short. I mean, it doesn't. The people around me do not give me what I need. So I place the entire explanation out there. And when I'm saying that, well, mm, that may not be the case. It may also be that you do not sufficiently appreciate what your surroundings actually bring to the table.
Mm.
That your social perception might be somewhat off. That you might expect too much warmth in everyday social life and so on. So I think that uh, okay, I'll try not to generalize here because people are lonely for different reasons. Yeah. Um, we have those who are lonely for very specific reasons. Uh, say the kids moved away from home, so mom is lonely, feeling lonely. The kids feel lonely because they've moved away from home.
Mm.
They've moved to another city, for instance, to study at university or something. They've lost their old circle of friends and so on, or at least they're not readily available. You can be a victim of bullying. I mean, in all those cases, we can pinpoint fairly specific causes. And in those cases, it's also fairly easy to see what the remedy is. For
Is
instance, in
it
bullying, you
though?
have to
I
stop.
would.
In terms of, I mean, if someone is being bullied, well,
Mm.
you have to try to stop the bullying. If you've moved away from your social circle, well, you have to try to re-engage with somebody else. I mean, it's simply the thing here is that there's a change in your surroundings that explains
Mm.
why this unpleasant or painful emotion uh, is there,
Yeah,
and then it would also seems pretty plausible to look for a solution
yeah.
in in manipulating the surroundings in some way. But I mean, some people are not like that at all. For instance, those I call the chronics
Mm.
in my book, they always feel lonely. I mean, a change in their surroundings has no impact whatsoever on their experience of loneliness. They can have great family, great friends, uh, and yet great colleagues, and yet they feel so lonely. And in that case, of course, it would be far more plausible to look for uh, um, the causes and solutions in terms of individual dispositions. For instance, your own sort of social perception and so on. So I don't think there's a, um, it's not like there's one cure for everybody
Mm.
because people are lonely for different reasons. Uh, that loneliness will probably also have to be dealt with in quite different ways.
Yeah. Actually, it comes to address I consider the most challenging, but also the most potent part of your book, which is that of personal ownership and what people can do. And the victim blaming stance that we mentioned earlier. You did say in your book, quoting directly, lonely people should change their relationship to themselves and their environment. And you also write that whilst we cannot prevent loneliness from emerging as a feeling, we remain responsible for how we can respond to it. And yes, there is the potential criticism that someone will interpret this as a form of victim blaming. But I do hear that no, you're talking about self-ownership and actually a quite empowering sense of agency, although it is really a
Yeah.
fine line. For instance, in what you just said, I do find myself challenging it. Partly there's well, that's a very rational, prescriptive solution that you're prescribing because people can have I'm just challenging for the sake of having a conversation and a debate. People could be held back by internal reasons like their past
Mm.
experience, trauma. It's not just that you tell them what to do and they can
Yeah.
immediately do it. They might just not have the emotional capacity to. So that's one kind of challenge to that. And the other part is more like a question. You know the chronics that you talked about? So what I'm hearing is, okay, maybe for those people, it's not the environment that needs to change, but how they are seeing things. There's something internal, something in their psychology, which I think is a really good point. I wonder, can accepting it all be a solution? Can they just I'm not saying that this fits everyone, but can someone just go accept the sense of loneliness as a schema of their life for the rest of their life and just live with it or not?
I'm sure they can.
Mm,
I mean, humans, we're a pretty diverse bunch. So yes, sure. I think certainly. I mean, you have some people, they pretty much go through lives by themselves, and they seem to be relatively content doing that. And I think that's fine. I mean, if you can get that to work for you in some way or other, great. I mean, then there isn't much of a problem. What I'm saying that if there if there is a problem, the solution will not be
mm,
that somebody comes marching into your life
yeah.
and then all loneliness will simply vanish
Mm,
into disintegrate into thin air. It's not like that.
mm,
Um, and there are really no quick fixes here. So
yeah.
when I'm talking about taking responsibility, owning your loan, I mean that's a big process.
Mm,
It's not something you do in a day or in a week. And when but when I wrote my book, there weren't too many studies of what sorts of interventions that work or doesn't work and so on. Today we have a lot more of information about from intervention studies, and what they demonstrate pretty strongly is that changes in social surroundings have very little to moderate impact. I mean, for instance, the immediate thought when someone addresses there is a problem of loneliness is often, oh, we have to create new social meeting grounds or something like that. They have no effect. I
ah,
mean, they might be good for lots of different reasons, but it won't cure boredom. No, and it won't cure loneliness.
mm, mm,
Um, uh, some versions of cognitive therapy have, I mean, I'm not saying that the results are great, but they're better.
mm,
And that's all about working on your social perception. Because one thing that's interesting when we try to look at have the lonely here and we have the non-lonely here, how do they differ? Can we find some explanation for why? Can we find some fairly systematic differences between those groups? And there is really no difference in terms of what they do. There's no
interesting.
difference in terms of intelligence. There's no difference in terms of appearance. One group isn't prettier than the other, and there's virtually no difference in terms of how many people they are surrounded by during an average day and so on. But what we do find is that the lonely people are, in a sense, social perfectionists. They
Mm,
have very high standards for what counts as satisfactory social interaction.
Interesting.
So they are far more easily disappointed
Mm.
by their interactions with others. What we also see is that they look far more for signs of rejection than the non-lonely do. They find more signs of rejection than the non-lonely do, and they react stronger to signs
Mm.
of reaction than the
Mm.
non-lonely do. They seem to be somewhat lower in terms of empathy,
Mm.
and they also ask others far less for help in different situations, but they also help others to far lesser extent when
Mm.
others are in difficult situations and so on. And what we could say that the picture that emerges when we look at the lonely here is that the entire social field, it's risky, it's dangerous, you could get hurt,
Mm.
you could be disappointed. So there's something about, in a way, there's something defensive about the entire approach to the social field.
Yeah.
And of course, that prevents exactly the kind of immediacy that's so crucial for forming attachment to others.
Yes, because it goes back to
Um,
trust, isn't it?
yeah.
Trust is immediate.
Yeah. So that's why I think that, well, if you can do some work on your emotional responses there with
Mm.
your thought patterns here and so on, well, perhaps, perhaps it will help.
And that will be the task of therapy and self-development and trauma healing.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily have to see a therapist, but I
Mm.
think that you have to do some work on yourself.
Mm.
And you could get professional help with that, or you could do it by yourself. You could interact with perhaps someone you trust a little bit more, or whatever. So I'm not embracing therapy culture here. I'm not saying that oh, therapy is the solution. I'm just
Yeah.
saying that the solution will definitely be found in waiting for some knight in shining armor to enter your life, and then all of a sudden loneliness will be forever gone. It's
Mm.
not like that.
Yeah.
So even though I'm not talking about blame here, I'm not talking about guilt, I'm talking about causes of boredom. It will ultimately, to a great extent, be up to you to deal with those causes and change
Mm.
how they impact your life.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, a very sobering reminder. There are two, they're similar and related. It's the two words really hit home: expectations and perfectionism. So I almost feel the relief to know that, okay, the solution doesn't necessarily lie in you having to change your structure. You don't have to move country all of a sudden. You don't have to like find a new group of friends or suddenly stuff your schedule with activities. Sometimes it's about changing how you see things.
Yeah.
And I do think I have some expectations problems sometimes, whether in friendship or social gathering situation. And it's actually a very hopeful proposition here, which is that you can just do a mindset shift and it will change a lot of things. I find that empowering and encouraging.
Yeah. Well, you could also say that you have to learn how to hope
Mm, it's a hard
for
one.
other people. Yeah, because I mean, I'd say trust is the subcategory of hope.
Mm,
So in that sense, hoping properly will be essential for overcoming loneliness. But hoping, I mean, hope is also a pretty complicated thing. Hope demands something from you. If you truly hope, then there will be certain things that you have to do and certain things that you cannot do. I mean, hoping is not leaning back and waiting for something to happen. Hoping is all about changing agency, believing that it might provide the sort of future you wish for.
Huh. I haven't read your book on hope. Now I am tempted. But just to drop us a bit more hints here. So, what are some, if people are kind of sold by the proposition and go, okay, I want to have a sense of agency, I want to start hoping, I want to start to shift myself into a more trusting place because I'm really suffering in this perfectionistic, lonely place. What would you suggest this person
I would first of
do?
all say that go into those social situations that are a bit scary
Mm.
and dare to be hurt. I mean,
Oh God.
um,
What
trust
a
people.
ghastly suggestion.
Yeah,
No, I hear you.
because I mean, if you trust people, you will get hurt every now and
Indeed.
then. Yeah.
Indeed. And the
Uh,
real question is, can you take those every now and then and not
yeah.
die?
But I mean, living your life in a state of constant mistrust is a far worse alternative.
I think people don't see that sometimes. Because we're loss of it's the loss aversion thing, right? It's like this
Yeah.
sometimes the opportunity cost is not obvious. So if you're in a chronic state of mistrust and just not putting yourself out there, the kind of wearing you down loneliness, depression that's in the background may not shout as loud as when you get hurt
Mhm.
by a social exchange. So I think sometimes the math is done wrong here. I'm agreeing with you essentially, but saying that sometimes it's hard to see the cost of getting stuck in
Of course,
mistrust.
but of course it's hard.
Mm,
We do get hurt.
mm,
I'm just saying that not ever placing yourself in a position to get hurt is a far worse option.
I hear you and I agree.
So enter into those sort of relations. Learn to let things slide.
Mm,
Try to give other people the benefit of the doubt. They probably mean well. Most people mean well most of the time. Um, I mean, it's not a miracle cure.
mm,
But of course, at least you have to open yourself up to others. If you don't, then sure, loneliness will accompany for you for the rest of your life. And I'm not saying that such a life is not worth living. I'm just saying that you're missing out on something pretty essential.
mm. Thank you. As we close, maybe I'll share my own takeaway from your work and see if it aligns with your intent.
Yeah.
I mean, my sense is that we do need to reconcile with certain givens in social situations. I mean, this is not just from our conversation, but from reading the book, such as no two souls can meet seamlessly. I think this is where
Yeah.
sometimes, especially dating and intimacy
Yeah.
interactions, where it's unconscious, but somehow I do want the other person to be perfect and all the, there's
Yeah.
this, yeah, no two souls can meet seamlessly. And I think you also talked about how everyone ultimately dies alone. So there is some fundamental loneliness that we're not mitigating here. And there are inherent limits to all human connections. It's always partial. It's good enough, but it's not like perfect. And we need to reconcile with that. And that's the expectation adjustment that we talked about just now. And at the same time, we should take responsibility for number one, grieving these limits, accepting them rather than raging against them and then falling into victimhood and then not do anything about it. And so basically, despite these limits, we seek connection anyway.
Yeah.
Fair reading?
I think you summed it up beautifully.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is such a rich conversation, both theoretically and practically. What are some floating thoughts and feelings that you have at this point? Any residual things that has been triggered in this conversation or anything you would like to add?
Actually, I think we've covered most of the important bases here.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm, yeah. I think the hope part is difficult. I think I'm just putting myself in the shoes, or in difficult times in my life, or putting my shoes in someone who already feel quite hopeless and scared of
Yeah,
social
yeah,
situations.
sure, but could perhaps expand on that a little bit because why do we hope? Because we're vulnerable.
Please talk about
Uh,
hope.
yeah,
Please expand.
because I mean, without vulnerability, our lives would actually have no meaning.
Mm,
It's because we can get hurt, because we can lose things. That's because that's why they really matter to us. So vulnerability is really the key to living a meaningful life. And then we have to find some sensible way of dealing with that vulnerability.
yeah, yeah.
And hoping, which see as something very active,
How
is
so?
one of the ways of
Mm,
coping with that.
mm. How is hoping active? You mean internally active, or do you mean that?
No, I mean, hope. If you really hope, it changes you. I mean, people hope. If you hope, you act. You not only think, but you act differently than if you do not. To take a very banal example, those of my students who hope to pass their exams, they relate to the curriculum in a different way than those who do not hope to pass the exam.
Mm,
They read.
mm,
So I mean, and if you really hope for environmental change, you will actually do something. You will try to have some sort of impact.
mm,
So, what's so crucial about hope is that, of course, we're not talking about uh, manifestation or something that all influencers tend to be preoccupied with. I mean, hope has two essential functions here. First, it makes it possible for you to place your gaze somewhere that's beyond your current situation. You can see beyond the
yeah.
situation you're in. I could get there. Secondly, hope changes how you act. So
Mm,
even though there is your brain states do not change the state of the world, but the way you think changes the way you act. And when you change the way you act, you may actually change the world.
mm. I hear you. I do think it's the way out of depression and
Yeah.
loneliness. And I mean, I actually have your book right in front of me right now, next to your face on my screen. I am looking at your chapters. Defining hope. Is hope rational? Losing hope, optimism, pessimism, and hope. I think the world is in desperate need for hope right now. And it is also a very difficult thing to do. I mean, I read a lot of philosophy that is denouncing hope because, like, well, maybe I'm generalizing it, but I sometimes read a lot of philosophy to try to, there is a school of philosophy or a way of doing things, which is that you don't have so much hope, so you don't get disappointed. I mean, the Stoics is a little bit like that. It's a
Mm.
bit like, just
Yeah.
imagine that your wife is going to die tomorrow every day so that when you actually lose her, you don't cry so much.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think,
Yeah. I'm not. Yeah. I'm certainly not a stoic. I really like this formulation Nietzsche has someplace where it says that sure, life is hard, but it's not so hard that we have to go and become stoics.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah.
I'm enjoying Stoicism and the critique of it at the same time.
Yeah.
I do think, yeah. Indeed, I do think it's just as a social commentary, it's a survival philosophy. It's kind of the philosophy you
Yeah.
read when you were Epictetus, kind of a slave in prison, and then you probably meet
Yeah.
Stoicism. And I think the
Yeah.
resurgence of it, the pop Stoicism in the kind of pop culture, is saying something about the state of the world,
Yeah.
the fact that it's
Sure.
becoming more popular again.
yeah, of course, Stoicism is a philosophy for hard times,
Yes, that's the
and these are hard times. But what I think is the problem with the Stoic approach is, of course, that it leads to far too much acceptance.
mm,
Uh, and so, for instance, with Epictetus, the problem with slavery isn't slavery; it's that the slave cannot reconcile himself with being in a state of slavery, which I think is bollocks.
mm,
Uh, and I think that the whole argument about trying to get rid of hope so that you um, will not be disappointed. Well, that argument would make sense provided that hoping does not change the likelihood of a good outcome.
ah, mm,
But precisely because hope changes how you act,
mm,
you're more likely to end up with the outcome you wish for. So,
mm,
and we see that people who are more hopeful do better in terms of education, work life, family life, having a sense of a meaningful life, and so on.
mm,
So I think hope is pretty essential,
mm.
and hope is worth hoping for.
That's beautiful. Yeah, because I thought like I think Epictetus might say is you don't have you shouldn't go and try and change the whole slavery system.
Yeah,
You should just accept well, that's one
yeah,
reading of it. Just
yeah.
accept your fate because yeah, but I hear you and hope drives change, actual change and social change perhaps and activism, both on a
Sure,
personal
when we
level and
got
a social
communities of
level.
hope,
Mm,
hope is not something we just do each on our own.
mm,
We hope
mm.
together. And of course, we form communities of hope in which we are connected by hoping for the same thing.
I would love to talk to you about hope. Just another hour of this. But
Let's talk about hope at another time.
I would love to if you're up for
Yeah,
it. But thank you so
yeah,
much. I have
sure.
personally enjoyed this very, very much. Thanks for taking my challenge and up for a debate. And your openness really shines. Your passion is you. Yeah, I've enjoyed conversing with your mind.
Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, this conversation has made me feel less lonely and more hopeful.
Excellent.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a lovely,
Okay.
lovely day.